Maria Nikolakaki, the professor from Greece. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Regis, and a Merry Christmas to those who celebrated, and may the love and hope of Christ's birth bring optimism in our very dull lives.
Yeah, well, I agree with you, and I wish you the same in this very holy season, really. Um, but I'm really excited about the topic we're going to talk about tonight. You are an expert. You've spent your whole life as a professor uh, examining educational pedagogy. And the title of the show tonight was The Failure of Education. Now, I was a high school teacher and a coach in the 1970s. And I have to say, growing up, I was not a good student. I was not interested in school. In elementary school, I was bored. I was put in a closet. I was put in a corner because I couldn't sit still and I was being disruptive. When I went to high school, I got a very good education, but it was more discipline. I learned to write. I learned to study, but I was not good at taking tests and feeding back material out of a textbook or from a lecture. It was the same thing in college. I was nowhere near the top of my class, nowhere near. I was different. I think my brain was wired differently, Maria, and I had to really struggle to get through and to compete with guys that were really book smart, memory smart. And it was the same thing when I got into my postgraduate work. I was studying in Rome, as you know, to be a priest. And I studied theology and scripture. And again, it was very difficult. The Jesuits were the professors, and they would give lectures. There was never any chance to talk to a professor, to raise your hand in class and say, I have a question. You listened, you took notes, and then you went to take an exam, and you were expected to feed back the right answer. It was only when I finished formal education that I began to learn and study and research on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very rapid process for me. I was buying books. I was reading everything I could get my hands on. And Maria, I found out that I had not a learning disability. My brain was wired in a different way that the formal educational system did not encourage and foster. I was more creative. I was more right brain. I was able to see systems, big picture. And I was always that way, but it was never encouraged. It was never fostered. And I was never encouraged to develop that. And so when I began teaching, I swore that I would never put red marks on a student's papers. I would always just read it with them, encourage them to do something more, to something less. Did you consider this? Whatever. And I never gave any grades. Now, because of this, I took a lot of heat because that was not what the educational system was all about. It was about tests. It was about grades. It was about passing and failing. And I refused to buy into any of that. And in all these years since, Maria, I have given talks and lectures to teachers as a consultant. to large organizations for about 10 years, I was always emphasizing this, that everybody has a gift, and the current educational system and the current business structures do not recognize those latent, really important gifts that people in their organization have. It's all based on performance, performance evaluations, getting ahead. Now, that's my introduction to tonight. You and I have done many shows on a lot of different topics. But Maria, I want to focus now with you tonight in the first of an entire series that you and I are going to do on exploring education. Now, I'm an American, you're Greek. I always thought that it was just the American system that was really messed up. And here in Russia, where Russian education, well, I should say this, the Soviet education was far superior to anything I had ever seen anywhere. And I have no idea really what it was like in Europe, except for my experience in Rome. So tonight, with you, Maria, an expert, you've spent your whole life studying pedagogy, studying education. We're going to look at the failure of education globally. Now, in your writings and in your book, which you have sent to me and I have gone through, you talk about neoliberalism. You and I have talked about this topic in general. Can you define for me and for those people who are watching what you mean by neoliberalism?
Well, if we want to understand what neoliberalism is, we have to go, first of all, on the financial aspect of it, which is the theory that private entities and institutions work more efficiently than the state. So the state should surrender its functions to the private capitalists, who can then see how to make profit out of it. Now, this theory was very intense, like in the 90s onwards, and people were actually supporting the idea that the state is bad, so only capitalists can make things function. And we have seen during the last 30, 40 or more years how the state has surrendered most of its functions to privatization schemes, which have taken over public goods that were owned by the state for the people of the state. And now everything has been under a dominance of profits and how more money they can make out of all these functions, be it water, be it ports, be it airports, be it electricity. Anything that the state had in its ownership now has been gradually transferred into the pockets of the smaller elites, and then the big elites, the corporate elites, the transnational elites have taken over what the national or smaller elites were owning. So this is a major transfer of wealth from the people to the corporations and to the mega banks. In order for this to be justified, it had to have many different aspects to it. So it had to culturally be legalized. It had to be legalized through commercials, and it had to be justified through the educational system. They wanted to replace the functioning of state-owned assets into market-driven assets. So the whole mentality of what society and its role was had to be altered into the interests of the money owners. So we have seen, especially in the West, a decline of living standards, of the growth of debt in all countries. All countries in Europe, most of them, have increasing debt. Because if you transfer your assets to corporations, then there is where are you going to get money to run the state from? So that all more and more these the functions of a state through public-private partnerships also has been a menace to state-owned assets, because in this new form of neoliberalism, which is the newest state, what they do is that the state pays for the function, and then the private partnership, the private in the partnership profits from the function of the state, and it also puts the rules of corporations over the state. So what we have during the last 30, 40 years is actually transformation of social needs, social functions, and social impediments into the pockets of the big corporations. And this is something which has devastatingly hurt education. And what I want to say is that people have not paid attention to what is going in education. Although education has implications to the whole of society, either immediately because everyone has a child, a niece, a nephew, a grandchild who is in education, or indirectly because what we see is that the general status of thinking in a society has declined over the last decades. And it's not only in the Soviet Union and Russia that you mentioned. You must see what's going on in USA right now. Around 54% of Americans are able to read only at the level of the end of primary school. So we have more than half of the population unable to do critical thinking, unable to understand how the banks abuse their relationship, how tax works, or how much what is the deeper meaning of something they see on TV, and what is propaganda, and why what they see is not what is. So this is something that is very, very essential to society as a whole. And I think that it's time that we need to look at the function of education, the miseducation that we are offering our children, the lost hours of actually brutally punishing them with things that are not important, and children are not interested in, while at the same time there are important things that they need to learn, and they are forbidden, quote unquote, from learning. So this is I think if we want to dream of a better future, of a society as we need it, as it should be, we have to start with education.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And, as an American, and when I delved into the history of education in America, in the very earliest days of the colonies, the local colonies were in charge of education. They were one room schools where children of different ages were being educated. The emphasis on reading, the emphasis on writing, and the emphasis on really philosophical principles of democracy. That's what was happening in America at the time of the American Revolution. But then, 100 years later, in the end of the 19th century, a period of industrialization, the industrialists, those people who had money and owned the factories, only wanted people to be educated enough to operate the machinery and to handle some very basic business functions. And so it's really been a long, long time in America, since the end of the 19th century, that the education in America, in my opinion, has been dumbed down. There was no longer an emphasis on questioning. There was no longer an emphasis on analysis, on critical thinking, on debate. And this has not only gone through the elementary years of kindergarten through grade 12, that's high school, but also now in American universities. It's all being driven, as you're saying, by corporate interest. And Maria, you point out that it's not just driven by economy, it's driven by political decisions. And political decisions today, my goodness, the politics and the corporations do not want people capable of questioning, of critical thinking, of protesting. Would you care to comment on that?
Yes, I think that it is common knowledge that the system itself will not give you the education you need to overcome them, to take them out. So it always has been, through the whole history of education in the West, I'm talking about, how much education you needed to fit for the suitable professions that needed to be done, but not more than that. So, in the first case that you mentioned, the monitorial school, it was the school of necessity, where all grades, all ages were together, and they tried, one teacher in one big room was trying to educate all the children. That was at the beginning of the industrial age, where everything was sorted out to work like a machine. Now, gradually going on to the 19th, end of the 19th century, we had the all-age school, where every student went to according to his age, and supposedly according to his or her abilities. Now, that all-age school was a transfer of the Prussian educational system that was imposed in Prussia after the defeat of the Napoleonic Wars, where they thought they found out that they couldn't, the soldiers were not able to take orders, so they had to start this education in school when they were still children and young and flexible, in order to learn discipline. So the educational system of the 19th century was made in a military mentality, in order to train children to be disciplined and to take orders. Now, that is a stage where, as you and I mentioned before, poor children were not going to, if they ever went, because there was not a mass education yet, but if they ever went, they were about to receive the education that they need, the knowledge that they need to practice their profession better than being uneducated. Now, later on, we go on and we have, after World War I, we had an educational spring with the progressive education movement, where many educators appeared, like Dewey in US and Montessori in Italy, and Kirchsteiner in Germany, and many others, that started to a global discussion of what education is needed to actually have people get improved through the process of education. And then there we saw a turning to a child-centric pedagogy, group teaching, or project method, and things like that, that till now today are being regarded as progressive, but away from being taught, unless it's more private schools for the elite, where these are the methods that they use. Now,
so Maria, let me jump in if I may.
Yes.
You said something about education was training people for professions. And in the United States, that could be divided into two. Professional professions, doctors, lawyers, teachers, engineers, scientists, that was one thing. But then there were those students who could never advance in those areas, and then it became technical education, shop classes, auto mechanics, home economics, electrical systems classes for those students who were going to be working in service industries. Now, I thought that was very good. But here's the problem that I saw with all of these people in the United States, including me, who went on to college and tech and specialized professions, doctors, lawyers, scientists, etc. They were all highly trained in their specific discipline. They were not trained to think critically or globally. And Maria, the proof of that is today. In my own country, in the United States, I have friends who are doctors, who are lawyers, who are psychologists, who are professional business people, who or so narrowly educated that they are not able to think outside of that profession. Now, before you comment on that, I want to talk about something else that you have written. You're talking about the political, social, and economic decisions that are being made. And you write, it's an attack on democracy, public goods, the welfare state, and non-commodified values. Pick it up from there, Maria.
Well, as a Greek, I must enter at this point as a Greek concept of paideia. Paideia is a general education that leads you to critical thinking. And if we want to be honest about democracy, democracy needs educated people that can make decisions for the best of the community's interests. This is something that has been not allowed for because education, knowledge is a weapon that can strengthen us. So what they do is that they don't educate, they don't do paideia, they do training on a specific field. I can remember, I'm old enough to remember that in Greece, when you went into a department of anything, you would be taught the philosophy of your expertise, like philosophy of medicine, philosophy of education, philosophy of economics. You were always, the first semester, you were doing the philosophy of what you're supposed to learn. They scrap that out. It's not about morals, it's not about philosophy, it's about commodification of education as an establishment, as a function of the state that you're supposed to solve problems. You are not supposed to question why these problems, where they come from, who benefits, and who is left behind. So it's very important to understand that this education is crippling the capacity of society to comprehend what is going on and how to react and not be dumbified by all the propaganda that's going on, because we must also see that if you have pedagogy through education, you also have public pedagogy through the TV and the public rhetoric and the social media. These are public pedagogy which also contribute to information or confusion and surrender to what the state wants. And when I say the state, it's about a state that is not interested in its people's wants and needs, but it is there to facilitate the corporation and the donors of the political parties to make profits through passing laws or dictating conditions that will enlarge their profits.
Maria, wow, so many things are flooding through my mind. I would like to say this through all of my education, elementary school, high school, and postgraduate college work and postgraduate work, I didn't learn anything. What I learned, and it was a very good thing to learn was discipline. I learned discipline. At a certain time, a bell would ring, you would go to this class. And then 50 minutes later, a bell would ring and you'd go to another class. The whole day long was really based on getting all of us, all students, programmed to follow instruction. That was my feeling. And the other thing that I learned, it had to do with discipline, but I learned the discipline of studying. In order for me to survive in high school and college and in postgraduate work in Rome, I had to be able to discipline myself to study and to try to memorize and repeat everything back. And I think for me, and I think there are millions of other people like me, that education was a failure. Now, I think that I was very lucky to, when I finished formal education, to feel a need to educate myself in other areas that I was going to work in, whether it was education or whether it was psychology, whether it was counseling people. When I was a priest, for example, I had no background on this, and I found myself to become a voracious reader, consumer of all kinds of information. That's continued to this very day. Now, I can't speak for other countries. I'm only speaking from my own personal experience in the United States as a student and then as a teacher. And I reflect back on when I was teaching in high school. It was the same method that I refused to go along with. I was lucky. I taught religion classes for only 1 year, and I never gave any tests. I didn't feel that was the thing to do when you were trying to teach something like religion, Catholic religion, to kids. I taught journalism and photojournalism, and all I ever did was encourage to explore whatever they were doing in writing, in covering school activities for the newspaper or for yearbooks. Look at it. Try to examine what's going on. Try to tell the story in a truthful way, whether it would be in your writings or in your photography. And I've carried that really through my entire life. Now, I want to get back to some more theoretical concepts that you have been studying and exploring. And I guess I didn't give you a good enough chance to comment on what the educational system has done. And I'm guessing it's the same thing in Europe, because given what's happening in Europe with all of these unelected leaders in the EU, they are not practicing democracy. In America and in the EU, it's looking more like fascism, dictatorship. They're not looking out for the common good. They're not looking out for the welfare of the state. And this is terribly, terribly troubling. Anyway, I guess I want to have you speak a little bit more on how education has ceased to become a place of cognitive stability. I'm not sure what you mean by that. I'd like you to explain it. You talk about education being an instrument of enclosed socialization, and then a community with rigidly structured system of roles. Could you explain those three concepts?
Yes, thank you. I think that we need to disassociate something which is very clear in the Greek vocabulary, where all these concepts come from, between pedagogy and teaching instruction. So you can, pedagogy is about the philosophy of what you are teaching, to whom and how. Teaching instruction is all the philosophies being delivered to you by the state, and then you are just a cog in a machine, and you are supposed to deliver what the state tells you, and exactly in the same pace and the same rhythm across the country. Now, this is what we need to understand, is that all pedagogy, what you are taught and how you are taught, for what cause you are taught, is what determines what you will become, and even more so, what citizen you will be. Because people, I think, don't understand that the role of education is to construct the desirable citizen for the future. So if you want to see what future they are planning, then you need to go to schools and see what pedagogy they are implementing. And if you go to US schools, for example, you see cameras, you see cops and dogs watching over. You go through the school through metal detectors. You have cameras all over you. You have, so the police state, you are trained to be part of a police state. That's the kind of citizen that you are trained to be. In US, about 10% of the children, because they are hyperactive, they have named this a mental disorder, and 10% of children are on Ritalin, which is a kind of a tranquilizer, a drug that you give to children. I mean, the pharmaceuticals obviously rule USA in more ways than one, and it's not enough to give them now 72 vaccines till they get to 18 years old. 10% of the children are on Ritalin, which is, I mean, one of the few countries in the world with such high, the only country, I think, with such high medication of the more quote unquote restless children. So
Maria,
you can,
if I can I jump in?
yes, of course.
You really hit on something really huge. My middle child, in first grade, his first grade teacher called us in and recommended that we get him on Ritalin because she said he was hyperactive. And so many kids were being diagnosed by their teachers as being hyperactive. We went to a child psychiatrist. Cost a little bit of money to do that, even back then. And after the psychiatrist had spoken with my son on several occasions, he called us back, and this is what he said. Your son, you need to take him out of the formal educational system immediately. And he said, I recommend you putting him in Montessori.
Yes.
Now, a lot of people not aware what Montessori is, but it's a whole different approach to education. It's called on group learning. It's called on discovery, on group problem solving. It's based on constant activity involving the children in learning experiences, unlike everything that was going on in the public and even private educational systems. And so I wanted to emphasize that, Maria, when you were talking about how the system deals with children that they call hyperactive. They were placed in an educational environment that was not catering to their intellectual and physical needs. That was my problem. I am sure that I would have been diagnosed as hyperactive back in the day if they ever knew what it was. And anyway, I just wanted to jump in because I think that was an extremely, extremely important point. Now, if I can just, with the time we have left, and I promise you, and I promised the people who watch this show, we are going to dig down deeper on all of these points that you're talking about. You've written books about this, and I want to make it.
So my last book, may I?
Yeah, of course.
It's The Anatomy of Neoliberalism and Education, Imperialism, Class Struggle, and Pedagogy. It's got an afterword by Peter McLaren, a very highly renowned pedagogue. And in this book, it's not only about education, it's about neoliberalism, how it was installed, who were the factors behind it, what economics what led us to neoliberalism. It goes back, sorry, to the defeat of USA Army in Vietnam, where the economy collapsed, and then they had to get off the golden standard, and everything had to change. So I think it's a transdisciplinary book that has one chapter, the last chapter, on education, how whatever happened influenced in education. So I mean, anyone who is interested in the topic might consider.
Can that book be purchased like on Amazon?
Yes, it's on Amazon.
Okay, so I'll have to put that in the description and a link to that, so that those people who are interested in that depth of philosophical reflection, practical reflection, they can access that. My purpose is to try to simplify these concepts with you for a wider audience. Now, I want to move on with the time we have left to some consequences of this movement. And one of the biggest consequences that I have discovered in my own life, and I know that in your work, you have underlined this, you've talked about it, is that it has removed the teacher from any position of power. The teachers now, and I don't know what it's like in Europe, I don't know what it's like in Greece. In the United States, for decades now, teachers have had to teach to the tests. The tests were created by cretins, geeks, in the US Department of Education, people with supposedly degrees in psychology, supposedly people with degrees in pedagogy, like you have specialized in. And basically what they did was they constructed curricula according to what society wanted students to learn. It was an evaluation system. Taking these tests would determine whether a kid was promoted from one grade to the next, or whether the kid could even get into college later. And what this did was it drove many teachers out of the profession, because the teachers in a given school district, in a given state, for the most part, I believe, knew best what those students needed to survive. I have many friends who are teachers, teachers in grade schools, teachers in high school, who who, who understood the political and the economic conditions in their particular states, where way back in the beginning of American education, teachers were in charge. And they have stripped the teachers of this power, of this gift that they have to excite students, to get students enthused about learning and about discovery. And I think this is one of the most serious things that has happened in this neoliberal movement. And I guess that's what it is, that it has disempowered teachers. Your comments on that?
Well, yes. If we want to understand what the American educational reform has been all about, it started actually in the 1970s, when they started to think that Japan has, is selling more cars than US, and so they had the total quality control system. So they thought that Japan was going to go forward, more forward than USA. That was the justification that they brought. So what happened is that in 1983, Condoleezza Rice comes up with a nation at risk. So they said, we are not competitive enough in all these functions. And that's because our educational system has failed us, blah, 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 and we need to reform it. Now, what happened was that in 1989, we have the Business Roundtable, which is an enterprise of the 1,000 biggest American corporations, take over education. So while we started with a community-based educational system where the teacher was the one who was responsible for the child learning, now we have the Business Roundtable that took over, and it set some standards of what education should achieve. And they are the ones who came up with this standardized testing. They, for the first time, they implemented nationwide, 350 million people living in USA. All of the states in USA were enforced to follow a common core, which is a curriculum system of what students should know. And then they implemented these standardized tests, which were a ridiculous, time-consuming, and energy exhaustion of students, of teachers, and of the school. Then what they did is they conceived this concept called meritocracy. So the whole educational system was rewarded according to how good the results on the standardized testing were at a national level. Now, these reports actually ended up in giving more money to the schools of the rich, while closing down the schools of the poor. And then what happens is all this led into a process of privatizations of schools. So the system is transferring in this public-private partnership that I mentioned before under the name charter schools. The same goes in UK. They're called academies. They're trying to push this through all Western world. And what's going on is that the state pays the money that it's supposed to pay for the functioning of a school, but it has the control is given to individuals or companies. So that is how they were able to destroy education, because before, in like 20, 30 years ago, you could see USA educational institutions, universities, or and I'm not talking about the Ivy League, which is a whole different clause in general. But American education was one of the leading educational systems in the world. And now it has gone down, down, down. And I said before, most of the Americans are illiterate, functionally illiterate.
Yeah. Well, even Donald Trump, I detest that man, but he is illiterate. It's well known he does not like to read. He likes to have people tell him what's going on. He's not a very intelligent, intellectual person. He's focused on results, business type results, real estate transactions, deal making. And, if anybody listens to him, who has reached the highest office in the land, he is incoherent. He cannot complete a single English sentence coherently. He's all over the place. It's terribly embarrassing, but I have to think he's a product of the environment. He is a product of the environment. There's got to be millions of other people who probably are very similar to him. You mentioned that most 50% or whatever it was of Americans can only read at a 5th grade or a 6th grade level. And Maria, the other thing that we're going to talk about as we go along in this series is the impact of television and social media. Americans no longer read. I think people across Europe no longer read newspapers or books. They get their information from alternative media, from videos, from sound bites, with no understanding of critical analysis or systems thinking. And to me, Maria, this is terribly troubling. And my daughter was a very gifted student. She specialized in education. She finished at the top of her class in university. She got a job in a very wealthy district teaching rich kids from rich families. And she was then moved into, I forget what they call it, advanced education in math and science. And the focus in these schools was to help these smarter, quote unquote, smarter, rich kids get this quality education that they wanted, meanwhile, leaving the rest of these kids behind. And, this is what I started out ranting on. Excuse me, coming down with a cold. That kids like myself, who didn't have the gifts, the intellectual gifts to succeed in a structured educational system, we were left behind. I don't know. I think I was fortunate that other things that had to do with my background and my experience uh, helped me overcome that. But oh boy, I think that's the twofold problem: is taking the power away from the teachers, standardized testing, and all of this leaves the students behind. Maria, what are your final thoughts on this before we finish? Where are we going to go in the future in this discussion?
I think that the basic thing that everyone needs to understand is that there will not be a better society if there is not a better education. So it's always, does education change society, or does society change education? And I think that we must emphasize the role of teachers, because the teachers can change the students, and that way we can change society. And I think that this educational issue should be more politicized. It must be. It is, for me, as I say, it's the most political act that you can do, is to educate, because you are influencing the perception and the values and the standards and the thinking of future citizens. We cannot have democracy if we don't have a proper education. And we must understand the role of education in changing society, because it is our duty, as the citizens of society, to demand more. If education was not so damaged and disempowered, the Europeans, or even the Americans, would not tolerate all these politicians that are uneducated and installed in all the major European countries, that are illiterate and an embarrassment to any citizen around the world. I think about Kaya Kallas, think about Merz, think about Macron. These people have no IQ bigger than a room temperature, as they say. And yet they represent the people. Why? Because the people have been dumbed down. The people don't think that it's insulting to be represented by these political dwarfs. So I think that we must actually pay more attention to education, because without education, society has no future, and they know it, and that's why they destroyed education. We must fix it.
So, one of the good things about Donald Trump, and we're coming up against an hour, but I don't really care, is Donald Trump is trying to disassemble the United States Department of Education. He wants to break it up, disempower it, and whether he says it or not, to give the system back to the states. Now, I have some friends who were teachers in very rural districts in the United States, and they claim they couldn't survive without funding from the federal Department of Education. It's a catch-22. But I think and I hope that by eliminating the federal Department of Education and returning it to the states could be the silver lining, could be hope that people in the local communities realize how education has failed them and how it's up to them. All politics are local. It's up to people in small communities around the United States to decide for themselves what their children need. Broadcast.
Yes, I'm very much pro community schools and localized attention. Actually, parents also need to be connected to the schools, and they should also be um, contributing with their labor or with their attendance, because it's more, schools must become more than just an educational just for typical education. It should be a whole day school, if you ask me, to where people where students can opt and go and take dance lessons or music lessons or anything that they like. It should be a community function. It should not be run by the central state as implied by the oligarchy class that wants to use all these uh, students to become citizens, to comply, and be trained, be disciplined through education, so that they have the suitable disciplined workforce. I'm not saying that education does not have this function of creating a workforce, but it's much more than just preparation for business type accommodations. It's about fulfilling the inner self at the level and at the pace that one can become in order to fulfill his abilities, capabilities, interests, and become the most that he can become. So, if we don't have that by education, then society is deprived much of the human potential of its parts. And we must understand that education should become a central topic in our interests and in our discussions, because there is no future if there is no education. We must understand that.